There's a lot of movement currently happening with Pokemon prices, and we're getting to a point where we're kind of questioning, are there just too many chase cards? Now, before I get into that, I actually am gifting this Marshadow illustration rare to one subscriber. Now, if I reply to your comment with this Terrapagos emoji, then well done, this Marshadow is being sent to you. And hey, if you are a first timer, welcome to the channel. My name's Phil, and I've been creating Pokemon content for nearly 2 years now. Definitely feel free to subscribe for consistent Pokemon updates. However, it is making you wonder if we're hitting a bit of a chase card overload. I mean, there's just so many incredible artworks that have come out, and it is getting much harder to keep up with all of them. But you know, if everything's a chase card, what is an actual chase? Like when we're looking at cards from, Mega Evolution to Scarlet and Violet to Sword and Shield, we are literally spoilt for choice with amazing artworks. And not just amazing artworks, but a lot of these cards are very expensive as well. One thing I always think about is that the person buying all these cards, they also need to be educated on these as well. And with so many artworks that have come out, it is hard to keep up with it all. Though, I thought it would be interesting to just look over some chase cards over the years, look at the prices, and then, ask that question, when does it just become too much? All right, first one that I want to talk about, and it is a chase card for Temporal Forces, but it is the Raging Bolt from Temporal Forces. Now, this is the interesting thing about this, okay, is that a lot of the cards I'm showing you, some are going to be like fairly priced, some are going to be pretty expensive, but when you really think of it on a wide scale, you can see, wow, there's just so many expensive cards. There's literally so many cards that are like, quite high priced, and like, how can you keep up? This Raging Bolt, actually wasn't the top chase card of Temporal Forces. It was actually initially Iron Crown, and then as the years went on, this one's kind of taken over. Right now, this one's currently selling for, around that $67 range. $67 is a lot of money to be spending on a Pokemon card, but you know what? That probably wouldn't even be for the Scarlet and Violet era. Like, that probably wouldn't even be in the top 50 or 60 most expensive cards. That's how crazy it is. And like that question of when is too much too much? Well, as I continue throughout this video and you see these cards, you're gonna be like, wow, man, prices are really bananas. Like, they've actually gone out of control. So that's just one example. And you know what's funny thing? That Raging Bolt right there is like not even expensive. That's like a lot of people like would actually consider this a super cheap chase card. So that's kind of wild, right? I mean, the fact that $70, like $70 is like, to me, that's a fair bit of money, right? I mean, you can buy like a really good video game with that. There's so much you can do with that, but that is considered a cheap card. Now, here's the Raging Bolt from Prismatic Evolutions. Honestly, this is a really great artwork. When I saw this was actually, I remember the reveals for like Prismatic Evolutions and Terrestrial Festival, when they came out, and I just thought, this is such a sick card. I still think it's awesome. Haven't added it to my collection, but really awesome art style. But even this one right now is selling for $71. So a very, very difficult card to pull from Prismatic Evolutions, but same with Temporal Forces, both have difficult pull rates. But here's another pretty desired card, also selling for $70. Like I said, $70, to me, that's a lot of money to spend on a Pokemon card. But when you really go into it, you can actually see it's not that much. And that's the kind of wild thing about Pokemon cards and collectibles. The prices of them can, get out of the realms of common sense. And you might be just entering the hobby and you might be like, oh wow, I want to buy some of these cards. You might be thinking, hey, $70, that's a lot of money. And you know what? The longer you're in the hobby, you realize like $70, like if there is a really cool card that you want for $70, like you kind of start thinking, hey, like that's not that bad. And how bad is that? Like that is actually the fact that like I find $70, like I know $70 is a lot, like for other things, but when it comes to Pokemon cards, I'm like, wait, that's cheap. So like, it's a weird mind kind of thing, like how it happens. But that's the crazy thing. And you keep seeing like a lot of the cards throughout the Scarlet and Violet era, some of the price have exceeded 200, 300 US. Like, it's actually pretty crazy. Now, moving on to the Mega Lucario, new chase card that came out, pretty desired as well. But, right now selling for $193, was selling for around $305, around October this year. But, still selling for 200 US, right? Or 193, like just call it 200 bucks. That is a, crazy amount of money, right? And this is probably one of the more expensive cards, okay? Not crazy expensive for modern cards, but it is in that kind of more expensive threshold. But you can see, real high prices, and it's just become such a normalized thing where people just be like, hey, $200 for a chase card, why not? I mean, I like the card, I'm gonna spend that money. But that's the thing, and I think that's why grading has also picked up a lot, because because, when you think about card grading and you think of it all together, people, if they're going to be spending that kind of money, they do want their kind of card encapsulated and protected because, there is far more risk when you buy it raw, just for damage and all those kind of things. Now, also, a lot of these cards are far more expensive as PSA 10s, though if you are a fan of graded Pokemon cards, then it's a good time to speak about today's video sponsor, Sushi Grade. Now, Sushi Grade is a card grading analytics platform built for collectors who actually want to make smarter grading decisions. For example, on the homepage, you can actually just search a specific chase card and it will show you the gem rate for PSA 10, along with whether or not it's actually profitable to grade. Now, there's also a cross-grading section tab. It actually shows you which slabs would actually go up in value if you cross-graded them. So, if you have some slabs lying around and wondering whether or not it would be worth cross-grading, this actually makes your decision far easier as it's all laid out for you. And the best part is you can actually unlock every premium feature using the promo code on screen, which gets you 10% off for the first month. The link to Sushi Grade can be found in the video's description. Once again, a massive shout out to Sushi Grade for supporting the channel. Now let's get back into this video. Now, same thing here with the Lily's Clefairy from Journey Together. Right now it's selling for $139. You can see it was selling actually for around $173 around early October, has had a pretty big price drop. Now, interestingly, $140, there you go. That's another card that's already exceeding, that $100 price range. And, how many more cards have we got? That's what I mean when I'm speaking about this, is the question that I'm really thinking is how many chase cards? Like I said earlier, okay, it's about the education. Now, what I mean about the education is, a lot of these cards that are expensive today, are they gonna really be expensive in 10 or 15 years? Because there's just so many cards. All these collectors need to be educated on all of these artworks. There's just so many. Think about a lot of the collectors today. How many of you really know about the really awesome cards from the Diamond and Pearl era? How many of you really know of all the cards from, the Black-White era? Not many people would know of all those crazy chase cards from back then. And that's the crazy thing, because when you think of it in a long-term kind of lens, you kind of realize wow, all these people today and all these chase cards today, there's going to have to be people that are educated that these were chase cards because there's so many that have come out. And that's a really interesting perspective to think about, because when I actually think of it like that, a part of me feels like, hey, it's going to be very hard for these card prices to maintain, because you do need all these people to know. And even if the prices are there, a bigger question is, will it actually get that price point? Because, what something is valued for in the market, it can become a very different story when you try to sell it as well. And that is something people don't speak about enough. And, it is something to keep in mind. Same thing with the Mega Gardevoir. You can see it was selling for $317. Right now selling for $205, but still, $205 for a single card. And sometimes I think we've all been in this almost like this trance where it's oh yeah, we're just thinking Pokemon cards. But how many cards have I already shown you? Every card that I've shown you, maybe you don't know some of the cards I've shown you. It's probably very likely that if you are a fan of the TCG, you'll know all the cards I've shown you, but still all of them are over $70, right? So there is just so many cards right now that are exceeding crazy price points. But also, if you ask me, will it get better soon? That's also probably not, right? There's just too many people in the hobby, too many people love collecting Pokemon, and Pokemon is just, it's a massive franchise, dude. It has something that a lot of people would envy, right? And when you think of Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh, they're always trying to do some crazy kind of, nostalgia things or cross kind of promotional things, and Pokemon doesn't need to do that. In fact, Pokemon's had a few nostalgic sets, I suppose Destined Rivals, even though it goes into that Team Rocket nostalgia, Pokemon 151, and even the Black Bolt White Flare, right? But most of Pokemon, it's new, it's fresh, it's exciting, so it is interesting how it works. Now moving on to a very cool Pokemon card, the Team Rocket's Mewtwo. It was selling for $582. Right now it's selling for $457, so dropped actually a fair bit in price, but still $450 USD for one Pokemon card. The prices of some of these, probably this card is one that is going to stay in that kind of limelight. Main reason being it is Mewtwo, and Mewtwo has a lot of fan demand. A lot of people love Mewtwo. Massive famous Pokemon. Especially for those early Gen 1 kind of collectors who probably have the most disposable income. The kids that watch all the first Pokemon movie, and that'd all be between the ages of 35 to anywhere maybe even mid 40s, right? These people have definitely more money to spend on Pokemon cards if they choose to do so. And Mewtwo is definitely a very nostalgic magic draw card for them. So maybe this one in particular will be able to hold a high price, but still it shows you, the insane price of collectibles. Same thing with Prismatic Evolutions. I mean, it has dropped a little bit. The Sylveon was selling for, just under $400. Right now selling for $324. But how many cards have I just shown you from the Scarlet and Violet era? They're all going for really high prices, right? And that is a big thing that you kind of have to realize, like, wow, Pokemon cards, it's an expensive hobby. And I speak about it a lot. Like, if you do collect Pokemon, it is a good idea to have separate hobbies. Like think of a pie chart, right? If you're thinking about all the hobbies in your life, you do not want Pokemon cards to be filling a lot of that pie chart, because the thing is, it all comes down to the cost. Because Pokemon cards are so expensive, the more you kind of play in this field where it's so crazy expensive, the more you can realize, like, hey, if you were spending this money in another area, you could probably get some really cool things. I think these big chase cards like the Sylveon and the Umbreon probably will hold their price, and of course there is an added benefit that these can climb in price over the years, but that's not guaranteed as well. Now moving on to the Leafeon Special Illustration Rare, was selling for $293, and there you go, another card for $263 US. I did say earlier this year that I did feel a lot of these Prismatic Evolutions, evolutions would be coming down a little bit in price, because I just thought, hey, there's just so many new chase cards coming out. It's funny because I have like a mat, like it's an Umbreon mat. If you've seen me stream, I always stream with that Umbreon mat down there, and I showed it to my wife the other day, and she needed a mouse pad, so I'm like, oh, just borrow this. And then she's like, do you know what Pokemon that is? And it was Umbreon, and she's like, oh, I think it's one of those Eon Pokemon, those Eon cat Pokemon that there's out there. So, that was pretty cute from her. But she did actually get it. She's like, oh, that's a Moonbreon. I'm like, ooh, close. But I kind of actually got thinking, right? Moonbreon would have been actually a pretty good name for Umbreon. It's actually pretty fitting. So, even though it's not, I mean, I just kind of thought, like, hey, that actually suits it so well. But, anyway, something to think about anyway. Now, moving on to the Magikarp Illustration Rare. Here you go, another card. Was selling for $400 US. Right now, it actually dropped a fair bit, selling for $250 US. But still, there you go, another card exceeding that $250 price range. How many? And I haven't even shown you all, like, the expensive cards. There's so many more expensive cards in the Scarlet and Violet era. Sword and Shield era, there's so many expensive cards. Even in the Mega Evolution era with, the Mega Charizard X that came out and, all those gold hyper rares, they're all exceeding like $400 or $500 US. So it's crazy to see the insane price of a lot of these cards on a wide scale. It's not just one or two Pokemon cards. It's not three. Actually, funny story, when Moonbreon released, when that actually kind of reached like a $200 or $300 price range, people couldn't believe it. They're like, whoa, what is this? This is crazy. And right now, like, we've just become so desensitized to the price of Pokemon cards, because when Moonbreon was selling for $200 or $300 on release and people couldn't believe that it was at that price range, now how many cards are just exceeding that, well and truly exceeding that, and no one even blinks an eye anymore. Everyone's just like, oh yeah, that's the game we're playing. But back when Evolving Skies released, that was such a big deal, right? Probably in the next era, Generation 10, we're gonna reach that thing where it's like, oh yeah, $1,000 Pokemon card, that's just the normal game we're playing. Kind of like how we're seeing all these $250 Pokemon cards, and people are just like, oh yeah, that's okay. Same thing with the Pikachu from Surging Sparks, was selling for $350, dropped now to $294. But again, another example of a very expensive Pokemon card. And really, I mean, I do think the new Pikachu EX that's coming out in Ascended Heroes, to me, yeah, it wipes the floor with this one. It absolutely is such a better artwork, and I wonder if that's going to have any impact on the price. Probably not, but it's still something to consider. And of course, another one, the Greninja Special Illustration Rare, was selling for $378 US. Right now, selling for $317. Little bit of a buying opportunity for that card, but how crazy is that? I'm telling you, it's a buying opportunity, but it's still $317. But the climate for Pokemon cards has definitely become super interesting for a lot of collectors, and it is such a kind of interesting thought experiment to think about that this new playing field we've entered and how expensive they can be. I do wonder, as the years go on, will a lot of these cards maintain? But with all that said, I think there's some changes happening within the Pokemon TCG right now, and one of them is the big trend of people collecting certain illustrators, which has really picked up steam again, and it's having a bigger impact than people realize, and the reason for that can be seen in this video on screen right here. Within this video that's currently appearing on screen, you can actually see me go deep into the current shift that's currently happening in the market. Click the video that's appearing on screen and I'll see you all there. Appreciate you watching.